Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard here for myself for a patch 3.4 tournament tier list, tournament tactician week coming up on 100. What we're going to be doing today is going over the tier list, obviously. That's what we do every week in and week out. But where I am gathering this data from is a combination of the two fight nights that we've had thus far, Brazil and Europe, a little bit of ladder data, a little bit of past metadata, some personal bias, all the good stuff that goes into making a subjective tier list because tier lists usually aren't very objective. So, starting off in Tier 1, we have the Demacia package. This has been what was good last patch. I expect it to still do very good this patch. The nerfs to Demacia were minimal. Yeah, Sharpsight lost an attack, but decks like Tristana were really more using it to protect their backline units than anything else, so they don't really care as much about the attack nerf. Sivir Akshan might care a little bit about the attack nerf. Pantheon, because you have faded units, cares a little bit, but not that much. Like, overall, the Sharpsight nerf was pretty minimal. All of these decks are still going to be playing 3 Sharpsight. The health buff on Vanguard Sergeant kind of sucked. But Demacia was already doing better than anything else, and the nerfs that they got were pretty minimal in comparison to what a lot of other decks got. Fizz Lulu, the P and Z Yordles and Arms, also Tier 1. A lot of players still doubling up on the Yordles and Arms. Haven't seen as much of this on ladder, and I think it is just kind of one, people are bored of it. Two, Mono Shurima is just at an insane play rate right now, and I think people have been waiting for this deck to be good since it came out a year ago, and are really just kind of relishing in these first few days where everybody's playing it, the builds are still being experimented with, and kind of getting it while the getting's good. I don't expect that to last. I think Mono Shurima is fine. Tier 0, absolutely not. Tier 1, also no. But fine. I think it's a very solid Tier 2 deck, and time will tell how this one's going to stand the test of time. But right now, the ladder meta is very much warping around Mono Shurima because the play rate is so high, regardless of whether or not it's good. So that's impacting a lot of things. It's made it a little bit harder to evaluate ladder into tournament standing specifically. But I think that it's got a solid enough play style that people can build like triple Mono Shurima style lineups, things that are looking to pick on the slow decks. And one of the questions for tournaments specifically is going to be, how does Mono Shurima do against Demacia? Now, a lot of people understand that it doesn't do super well against Yordles and Arms. You don't really have enough interaction for that. Yeah, if you can get Xerath online, then you're going to be like in an okay spot. But for the most part, one of the big weaknesses that a lot of players have pointed out for a deck like Azir Xerath, sorry, almost said Azir Aurelia, is that it doesn't deal with singular large units very well, which is one of the reasons that we're seeing a rise in Victor and the Victor Riven deck, as well as the Aphelios Victor, but also one of the reasons that I think Pantheon is going to do particularly well, and I think Pantheon's really going to shine. If we were to have a tournament this weekend, as far as I know there aren't any big ones, I think Pantheon would be an excellent choice because Pantheon was originally sort of the weak link of the Demacia lineups in terms of getting picked on by Vengeance decks. If there was a Feel the Rush and a Darkness and a Bandletree or something along those lines, anything like that, in your opponent's lineup, there was a chance that your Pantheon was going to get 2-0'd. Now, with Mono Shurima doing a better job of keeping those decks out of the meta, while also not dealing with Pantheon particularly well, I think Pantheon is in an excellent spot. As good as it's ever been. It didn't really receive harsh nerfs. Like, yeah, Pantheon lost an attack, but it's not that big a deal. Aphelios has not made his way into the Pantheon decks just yet. Most of the ones that we are seeing are still Pantheon Yuumi Taric. That might change. I think that having a consistent gun generator in Aphelios is something that the faded units are interested in, but I'm not sure that that is necessarily a Pantheon deck. That might just be an Aphelios deck, and maybe you can even find a way to make Aphelios plus X with faded work in the same lineup as the Demacia Targon Pantheon decks. Only time will tell. I started off the patch experimenting with Aphelios Akshan, and I felt okay about it, and then I went on Twitter, and I saw 4LW doing something similar, and I was like, okay, maybe there is something here. I'll fuck with that a little bit later. Let me sideline it for now while I talk about the tier list and push this non-existent deck from my mind, talk about Mono Shurima and all that good stuff. And then Sivir Demacia, nerfs were pretty minimal. They're going to be felt, but overall it's still fine. It's still your big Demacia deck. I think the Spell Shield on Sivir in this low interaction meta is going to be pretty good. We saw Casman take the win at EU Fight Night with Sivir Demacia, I think Yordles and Arms and Scouts, or maybe it was Pantheon instead of Yordles and Arms. I think it was triple Demacia. And the Sivir Akshan did end up losing to the Sundisk in the grand finals, but still pulled it out with the other deck, so, it sort of was what it was. But overall, yeah, Demacia I think is still in an extremely great spot. I think that Scouts are still viable as well. I just don't like them as much as I like the other decks. Maybe if you're going to take something out, it's going to be Sivir Demacia. But Scouts was one of those decks that I think is going to feel the health nerf on Vanguard Sergeant a little bit more, because Scouts does play such a honest playstyle, whereas Sivir Demacia, you know, you can kind of like, you can level your Sivir or give things vulnerable or barrier and kind of play around that way, whereas Scouts just doesn't have as many combat tricks. The 3 health on the Vanguard Sergeant is going to be felt a little bit more, and it might not even be the best 3 drop in the slot for them, as they do have some options. As for the rest of Tier 2, Victor Riven has really catapulted, at least today on Friday, to, I want to say it's top 5 play rate in Masters or meta. I'm not really sure how Runeterra AR does their stats. I could probably look, but I didn't before I did the video, and now it's too late. But I think it's sitting at like a 65% win rate. The Voltron style gameplay, you know, when you're looking at these Demacia-centric metas and these Mono Shurima metas, just kind of low interaction. You know, there's not single combats in Yordles and Arms. You might be able to run that over. It's really just a matter of how fast you can go, and I think with Victor getting the 0 mana on the Hex Core, that deck is going to be going a lot faster. Now, I'm not super sold on Victor Riven sticking around long-term. This deck has popped up more than a few times over the course of the year as just sort of this fringe Voltron deck. I think that now, in this opening weekend, it's as good as positioned as it's ever been. So if you are very interested in playing this deck, now would be the time to do it. But I'm not expecting this one to stick around as a permanent tier 2 throughout the meta. But again, this meta is kind of not irrelevant, but irrelevant, because we're getting another balance patch at the end of the month, which means that this isn't the seasonal meta. They have also said that they might nerf Yordles and Arms at any time, so that could shake up the meta at any point. We're really in a big state of flux, so if I get things wrong, you know, at least you're not losing $10,000 because of it, because you listen to me. But yeah, I think that Voltron is fine for now. But again, no big tournaments this weekend. I don't even know if I'm going to have time to, like, change my opinion on this later. But moving along, Tri-Beam Control, you know, does pretty well into Demacia. Is going to do okay into Mono Shurima. It is kind of dependent on whether or not you are actually going to be able to, you know, kill that Sand Disk. And I know that there's a lot of Soothsayers and Rite of Negations in the Mono Shurima to ensure that that doesn't happen. But if you leave open Tri-Beam Control while playing Mono Shurima and you don't draw the Soothsayer, you might just lose the game. Because let me take a look here real quick at the actual Mono Shurima list, because I know that Swim's list is very popular, and I believe it's also the worst list in terms of actual ladder performance. Like, it is a concrete fact lowest win rate Mono Shurima variant, but also the highest play rate. So now you have to ask yourself, is that because people that don't know how to play the deck are playing it? Because Swim does have a very wide reach. Is this deck actually, actually not a good version? I think Swim capped out at like 2 or 3 mana. This is the version that I believe I just took this from Genesis CCG, who got 2nd place at EU Fight Night. So this is one that is already proven in tournament. You know, you got the Desert Naturalist in there for the mirror match, because you are expecting, if not a lot of Sun Disc, then at least some form of landmark decks. But as we can see here, the curve is still extremely slow, or low rather. But just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about Mono Shurima. So yeah, there is a chance that you are going to be able to kill the Sun Disc, because there's only 2 Soothsayers in there, because it is a dead card once you sort of play that first one. You don't really want to be loading up on it. No one's really playing as many predicts, so you're not going to like Feral Presence into it if you do whiff on it. But overall, I think like Tri-Beam Control is probably fine. I think it's, you know, pretty okay in this Demacia-centric meta. I think that Narswain is along a similar berth. This deck received a few more nerfs. Obviously, Nar is down to 3 attack. I don't think that impacts an insane amount. It does kind of suck that Grumpy Rock Bear has 4 health, because I think you are going to see a lot of Shurima. But again, you are just another deck that has that chance to just slip through the cracks and remove the Sun Disc on turn 1, and the builds right now aren't, like, they don't lose the game if the Sun Disc dies, but they're not looking great if the Sun Disc dies. And overall, again, another deck that I feel is doing pretty well into Demacia. I know it has a very good Pantheon matchup, so with Pantheon being a deck that I'm very big on right now, still going to be pretty big on Narswain, and I think that Caitlyn Ezreal are going to do something similar, even though I talked in circles a little bit on that earlier, because I didn't script this out. And then moving down into Tier 3, so again, Mono Shurima, gatekeeping slower decks. And Darkness receiving some nerfs, I think, is going to continue to be gatekept by Mono Shurima. So the question becomes, is the meta going to adapt by banning Mono Shurima and still playing slower decks and then getting farmed by Demacia, or maybe beating the Demacia? It kind of depends on what your lineup exactly is. Or are players going to like even double down on this Mono Shurima style gameplay, where they're bringing like Mono Shurima plus, you know, Bandletree and other decks that are looking to pick on slower decks? Because one thing I was looking at that I was interested in is Azir Aurelia has snuck back into, I think, top 5 play rate. And I was looking at it, and I'm going to put it on the tier list. And then I remembered that, like, you cannot play Mono Shurima and Azir Aurelia. And my understanding of both of these decks is that they are picking on slower decks. So You would like to put them in a lineup together, but you can't. And I do not know if there is a reason to play Azir Aurelia over Mono Shurima, because you are still susceptible to landmark removal. Granted, not as dead to it as something like Mono Shurima would be. And I think what it's going to come down to is how is the head-to-head of Azir Aurelia versus Mono Shurima, which I would imagine is going to be pretty Azir Aurelia favored. So maybe Azir Aurelia should have been on the tier list as a great option for players that really like the Mono Shurima style of gameplay, but are worried about players trying to pick on that. Because the matchup charts for the deck right now look atrocious, but that's because it's got such an insanely high play rate. You know, we'll figure it out in a couple of days. I'm just kind of setting up the base for the rest of the meta right now, so don't take any of this as like hard gospel. But Feel the Rush, I think, is a deck that is going to do okay. You know, it's not going to get gate-kept by Mono Shurima, especially if you are running something like She Who Wanders. And I think She Who Wanders Obliterating Champions is absolutely massive, because that is not only going to destroy Mono Shurima, but it'll also absolutely destroy Bandletree, you know, with Gnar going down to 3 attack. Not that that actually impacts the She Who Wanders. But I think that, like, She Who Wanders will just absolutely destroy the things that are looking to gatekeep the slow decks. Now, that means that Feel the Rush gets to play it. Maybe Targon's Peak comes back in a little bit of a way. I know Exasio tried to run triple She Who Wanders in EU Fight Night, and I didn't check his final placement. I just know it wasn't top 3. Maybe Peak is in there. Maybe it's not. Again, people are really focusing on Mono Shurima and trying to destroy these landmarks, so Targon's Peak might not be your best bet here. But it's something that I'm definitely interested in. I think the She Who Wanders style of gameplay is something that you're going to be rewarded for. Were there any tournaments this weekend? This is where it gets difficult, right? Is like, I don't even know if there's anything to prep you for this weekend in a large way. Then we go on to Spiders and Bandleburn, which I imagine are going to do pretty well against Mono Shurima and these other slower decks. Obviously can still beat out the Yordles and Arms of the Pantheon as well. So aggro, I should probably be putting aggro higher. What has kept me off of that is, one, I'm a little bit of an aggro hater. It's a known fact. But number two is that it's not really picking up the ladder win rate that you would expect it to for the high Mono Shurima presence, where if it does farm Mono Shurima, like one would kind of anticipate it does, then you would expect it to be a lot higher win rate than it is right now, especially given how good it does into Yordles and Arms and Pantheon. Like, aggro on paper looks good, but it's just not. So there's some kind of disconnect there. We'll figure it out later. Now I got to talk about Lee Sin. You can't run 6 Eye of the Dragon anymore. And Lee Sin has been a tier 1 deck in the past without 6 Eye of the Dragon, but I couldn't reasonably put it tier 1 or 2 because I do not know what new age Lee Sin is going to look like. It might not even be Lee Sin Zoe anymore. I do not think it is out of the question for Lee Sin to go towards Aphelios, especially with Wounded White Flame being such a large part of the deck. You know, you can't play the stall game and play for the Zoe level up like you used to. You might need something a little bit more proactive in the deck, and Aphelios might be that. So Lee Sin might even take this entire meta off until the, I think, April 29th balance patch. I wouldn't be super surprised if we didn't see any Lee Sin for the next month, and then when the seasonal meta rolls around, players start to pick this back up, like, okay, what are we doing here? But if Pantheon continues to do very well, then I think Lee Sin will still pick up its play rate, because Lee Sin does do very well into Pantheon. It's like the one Demacia deck that it does get its points in against, and so on and so forth. Darkness took some nerfs. The hands-down best matchup for Mono Shurima. Would not recommend Darkness right now. Bandletree loses to similar things as Mono Shurima, which maybe you double down on that and you say, okay, you know, I'm expecting people to bring these slower decks, or still got my percentage points versus Demacia. I think that Bandletree is fine. I think it'll pick back up a little bit later on, but for the opening weekend, very, very low on Bandletree. And then Aphelios Victor, I don't think is as good as Victor Riven for day 1 metas. This will probably change a little bit later on, but I'm also not sure that this is like the definitive Aphelios deck. Aphelios is a complex champion. I don't remember how long it took for us to really settle on the Aphelios Temple Boxtopus decks, but I know that like the Aphelios Boxtopus interaction was a very obvious way to play this deck a little bit early on. Now you can't do that anymore. So I think that Aphelios, in 2 weeks, I think Aphelios will probably have a deck, if not in tier 1, very high tier 2. I don't know that Aphelios Victor is it. I think this is just our week 1 adaptation. Brazil is very big on this, but I think a lot of Brazilians have also been really waiting to get their hands on a Victor deck, and Riven Victor doesn't really feel like a Victor deck in the way that Aphelios Victor does, where you're actually getting to take advantage of the level 2 side with these created cards. Because my biggest criticism of Victor, aside from the fact that he took 11 mana to level, my current biggest criticism of him is that in Piltover and Zon, there's not a lot of things that actually take advantage of Victor's level 2 side. A lot of the created cards in PNZ are already like 1 mana. So reducing them down to 0 mana is cool and all, but you are still just filling your deck with like 1 mana power level cards. You know, Poros might be the most impactful thing that you actually throw down on this. But combining that with Aphelios and Targon in general does feel a lot better. You're getting reduced cost on Celestials, that maybe you even get a reduced cost on with Mountain Scryer. Nobody's on quite that version yet, but like your guns are going to be 0 mana, and your guns are very impactful. These were 3 mana cards not too long ago. If you can play them for 0 mana at an unchanged power level, because the only one that's changed is Crescendum. So, you know, Severum, Infernum, Calibrum, Gravitum, these are things that players and devs have said are 3 mana abilities. Playing those for 1 or 0 mana because you either have a leveled Aphelios or a leveled Victor sounds very, very good to me. But again, not super sold that this is going to be the Aphelios deck going forward. Not sure how it does into Demacia. Didn't really get a look at the matchup charts of Aphelios Victor. This is kind of one of the last things that I put in here, kind of slipped through the cracks. But yeah, that is the tier list. Again, general broad strokes here, we are looking at Demacia good, Mono Shurima, the build around of the meta. Demacia probably beat Mono Shurima. Things that beat Demacia probably not beat Mono Shurima. Pantheon, very good versus Mono Shurima, not so good versus slow deck, but that okay because Mono Shurima keep out slow deck. But a lot of that is going to, like, I expect Feel the Rush to actually do very good, and Targon's Peak to an extent. I think Targon's Peak has to wait and cool off for Mono Shurima to really lower the play rate of the Noxus, or the, not Noxus, but landmark removal cards. I just think Scorched Earth when I think landmark removal. But anyway, Thralls might even be okay again. I straight up forgot about Thralls. Anyway, that is going to do it for me. Again, no tournaments that I am aware of this weekend. If you want to watch my patch rundown, I will have a link to that in the description below because it is not on my channel. It is on Giant Slayer TV's YouTube channel. I would love it if you go and watch that. I kept it to a nice and tight, I think about 22 minutes for 33 changes. Not bad if I do say so myself. But again, Online League Series will be back next week. I will be casting that with Jay Doza as usual. So we will have at least that tournament to look at. And again, don't forget to look out for my article. That will be wrapping up the tournament weekend, even if it is just fight night. I think Runeterra League starts next week, and I'm going to be paying much closer attention to that this time around than I did the first iteration, because I did not pay attention pretty much at all the first time around, but I will be paying close attention this time so that I have tournaments to talk about and things like that. But again, pretty low stakes weekend. I'm not certain on a lot of this, but this would be my perception of the week 1 meta. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. As always, my name is Boulevard. Good luck in your tournaments.